Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hello.
Great to see some familiar faces. Thanks for joining us so much for today's workshop. Sorry about the time change, but appreciate you being with us towards the end of a Thursday. Maybe as people are still joining, if you could let us know in the chat that you can see and hear us all good, see the screen clearly, that would be fantastic. Just give us a thumbs up or a yes, that would be wonderful. Fantastic. Thanks, Jess. We like to run our virtual training events as if we're in the room together. So if you can, we really encourage interaction. If you're able to turn your camera on, join us in the room. That would be amazing. And just while we wait a minute or two for everyone to jump in, we'd love for you to share, where you're located, where you're joining us from, and also your organization as well. That would be fantastic. Maybe your role in the organization. It's always good to have that clarity. Just popping in the chat while we're waiting for a few more people to join us.
Lovely to see some familiar faces. Andrew, Grav, Becca, Carly, it's like homecoming.
Yeah, it's been a long time, Phil.
It has, Andrew. Nice to see
Yeah,
you.
yeah, nice to see you.
I think it was Mount Macedon we last saw each other at a
Correct.
retreat.
Yeah.
Yeah. 10 years ago, maybe.
Oh, crumbs.
Yeah.
Emerging Leaders Program.
Yeah.
That's great.
Fantastic. Just while everybody is popping into the chat, and before we really kick off the workshop, we'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all learning today. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Got a few coming in. Rebecca, working from the Greater Western Water Sunbury office today. Wonderful. Carly's at Clone Crippen Burger in Brisbane. You manage the geoscience team. Welcome, Carly. Garav, nice to see you there. Fantastic. So you can pop into the chat. It's always nice to just get that engagement as we all join in and get to know each other. We'll be together for an hour and a half today. I'd also love to do a quick pulse check just before we dive into the content. If you could pop into the chat, what brought you here today? What is it about the culture code, the invisible force slowing your growth, is what we've titled the session, that has intrigued you today? What is it that you'd love to hear, to learn about the session? If you could pop in just one thing that has intrigued you about today's session, that would be fantastic. Andrew's in Macedon, chair with Vistage and partner at NEM Australasia. Wonderful. Thanks, Andrew.
Welcome, Gary. You're on mute.
Good to see you again, Phil.
Yeah, you too, Gary.
Hope you're keeping well.
Just for the rest of the people, Gary and I have known each other since we were 11. So we go back quite a way.
And haven't aged a day since.
That's right. We had grey hair then as well, didn't we?
Yeah.
Great to see you, mate.
Amazing. Gaurav from Melbourne, currently in the role of Quality Practice APAC, working for GPC Asia Pacific. Wow, fantastic. I think Zoe has joined us as well. Hey, Zoe. So we're just popping into the chat. One thing that's really intrigued you about this conversation today, the culture code. And I'm also going to pop into the chat a downloadable, the culture code canvas. If you'd like to download that, that's going to be what we're really focusing on today, so that we can work together on our culture code. So as you can see here, what we're going to cover today, we're going to look at how we decode the systems beneath the behavior. So what's really driving the way people act when the pressure hits. I might have stuffed up the slides there, Delete Phil, or is that you?
No, I think I did that. I clicked on the culture code link.
Oh dear.
Right.
We're also going to look at defining the few critical behaviors that sustain trust, accountability, and performance. And we're also going to build some mechanisms that make culture self-reinforcing, so not leader dependent. So that's the core of what we're going to be covering today. And as you can see, if you've downloaded the Culture Code Canvas, it's a really great tool that we're going to be coming back to throughout the session to support you as leaders to look at culture within your organization and within your team. Carly, so you've mentioned relates heavily to a strategic priority you're about to be involved with called the Clone Way. Fantastic. You're trying to instill some of the culture we have lost as you've grown rapidly. Amazing. Andrew, accountability and culture. Fantastic. Gary, mechanisms to reinforce culture. Jess, also joining from Greater Western Water from Footscray. Fantastic. Wonderful. So I'm going to pass across to you, Phil, to introduce yourself. I'm sure many in the room already know you, but it might just be nice to do a brief introduction and a TLS overview.
Thank you. Yeah, welcome everyone. Great to see you. As Kelly said, it's great to see some familiar faces, but also some new faces. So thank you as we catch up with the slides. So yeah, Phillip Ralph, I'm the founder and CEO of the Leadership Sphere. So we started in 2007 really with a mission and purpose to create stronger leadership and healthier, high-performing organizations and teams. So we work at the individual, the team level and the organizational level. I'm still passionate about the work we do. I think I have a lot of gratitude to work with so many great leaders, in Australia and some international locations. So, and by way of background, some of you know this story very well, but I didn't run away and join the circus when I left Shepherd and Gary. I ran away and joined Victoria Police. I was there for 18 years as an operational police officer, but also worked in the psychology unit for 5 years. And I worked on a whole range of different projects, including really creating a safer culture for police and for members of the public and reducing fatal shootings. Also worked with 500 police for a year to try and improve their health and wellness outcomes. Those kinds of programs led me to leadership development over those 18 years. I then went to ANZ Bank for 6 years, where I met Gaurav, and there I was the head of program delivery and consulting for a large culture change program across the world, responsible for 40,000 people in 40 countries, and the leadership and culture development, which was again an amazing program. And then 2007 started the organization. So a little bit about us, and I guess today as well. So Kelly, you might want to cover that off.
Sure. So today, this is the agenda. Really, the objectives for this session are to help you to translate values into really specific observable behaviours that hold under pressure, to identify and disrupt the hidden systems that can undermine culture, and also to build accountability and psychological safety into an everyday rhythm of work. And of course, like I mentioned and popped into the chat, to develop your culture canvas for immediate implementation if it's appropriate. So again, happy for you to be working on this canvas throughout the session. We'll be pausing throughout the session for you to have a think and to write down some notes as well. But I also, just before we really dive into the content, we wanted to give you some context around how the culture code fits in with our broader, what we call the Amplify model. So this is a TLS framework which is designed to cover each piece of the puzzle in building a healthy, high-performing team that consistently delivers on your organization's strategy. So what we tend to find is that there are three main obstacles that hold senior leaders back when it comes to building a high-performance team. The first one is that your team are busy, but they're not aligned or they're misaligned. And what that might look like is that everyone's working really hard, but maybe not always on the right things. And maybe priorities keep shifting, projects overlap, and maybe meetings feel a little bit like deja vu. The next problem we hear is that our team are working really hard, but we're not seeing the results. So it might be that you make progress, then something resets. The same issues seem to resurface quarter after quarter, and it can feel like there's improvement, but maybe not sustainability. And this is where we see many teams hit that exhaustion point or burnout, which is really prevalent these days. And then the third point, as you can see there, is strategy execution, which can be slow and frustrating. So you might know where you want to go, but getting there feels really harder than it should. So decisions take too long, ownership isn't clear, and change can feel heavy. So it might be that strategic goals get a bit lost in translation between leadership levels. It might be that momentum stalls under the weight of there's so much to do. So I'm curious, just of those 3 points, which one of these is impacting you the most currently? Just pop a 1, 2, or 3 into the chat. Maybe it's all 3. That's fine too. Just a nice little easy. Melissa, 1, Jess, 2, yep. Gaurav, 1, yep. Yeah, so we're all feeling it. But here's what we really want, what we want instead. So our 3 pillars that make up the core of our Amplify program. So broadly, that's performance, health and vitality, and leadership capability. So firstly, as you can see, performance, that's really around clarity, alignment, and follow through. So instead of busyness, we want our team really focused. So teams that know exactly what matters and why. So that looks like, clear goals, everyone knows and they can name and they can own. It looks like teams working in sync and not in silos towards the strategy, and also a system that supports performance and also health. So then our vitality method, what we've called the vitality method, is really around energy, trust, and engagement. So instead of exhaustion, we want our teams to be healthy. A culture where people can feel seen, supported, and they're engaged. And so what that looks like is that leaders who create safety and challenge in that equal measure. It's high energy, high trust, and a sense of purpose within the team. And so you can see here, as we move to the next slide, we've got elements of each of these pillars. So the culture code, this is where the culture code fits into that vitality method. And what we're going to focus on today, noting that each of these elements around the outside of the circle is normally a 6-week topic. So we can only cover so much in 90 minutes, but we're going to do our very best to give you as much as we possibly can. And so just to round out the model there, we've got the leadership blueprint, which is capability, connection, and enterprise thinking. So instead of siloed focus, we want that systemic leadership. So we're supporting leaders in their ability to lift their eyes from operations and to that enterprise level impact. So we're looking for leaders who can align people, performance, and culture, and not just manage them. And so this is what we help people do within our Amplify program. We'd love to help you if that's a fit for you. So if you're a senior leader with 5 or more years experience, if you're leading a team inside a really fast moving or complex business, and if you're hungry and willing to challenge yourself, this could be an opportunity for you. And we'd love to invite you to book a call with us after today's session to not only discuss the culture code and how you can implement what we talk about today into your organization, but to also discuss whether you're a fit for the Amplify program as well. So I'm going to pop just that link if you would like to book a call to speak with us further around that and how we can implement the culture code for you too. Phil, I'm going to hand back over to you.
Right. Thank you. Great introduction, Kelly. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this session, on delivering this session and having conversations with you. For me, it's at the heart of culture and leadership. And I won't be so bold to say we've cracked the code, but I reckon that what we're going to discuss today will go a long way to making real and tangible changes in teams and organizations. And I first discovered systems many, many years ago when I was an undergraduate, and you'll see there's a very strong kind of systems conversation or undertone in this session. And so I'd love, to also harvest what's in the room and the experienced people we have in the room. So, but without further ado, let's begin, and hopefully it's a really interesting journey for you. So I think we always start these webinars or these workshops with really, where are we today? And I think the bureaucratic tax or drag has a huge cost in financial and social terms, and we'll talk a lot about how organizations are structured and how they're kind of a hangover from the industrial age. But most of these figures won't be a surprise to you if you don't know them already, but there's still high levels of disengagement. It's gone back 3 points in the last 12 months. Including managers. The actual manager engagement rate has also decreased since 2024, which is interesting. Managers account for 70% of that variance in team engagement, which we know. So the one-up manager relationship is really important. Then some random facts about the value of some of the things we hold so dear in organizations, like strategic planning. only 11% of executives think it actually adds value. 1 in 7 agree that only strongly agree that performance reviews inspire and create value. 11% of executives, only 30% of employees feel engaged during change. Is there any kind of surprises in there for you, or just put something in the chat about, yep, I experienced that in my organization, or it feels right, or you're really curious about any of that data that might be there? Just realized I like that stat so much. About 11% of executives is in there twice, just in case you missed it the first time. Any quick thoughts on that? Does that kind of resonate with your reality?
Probably surprised that sorry, I had technology issues, so apologies
Zoe.
for joining late.
That's
Probably
right.
surprised that only the percentage around those that find strategic planning creates value. I thought that was quite low.
Yeah, for sure. And the stat I haven't got there is 80% of CEOs think strategic planning and implementation is also not great. So 80% are dissatisfied with the implementation of the strategy once we actually have a strategy. So again, which is part of the things we'll be talking about today. So there's a lot of things, there's a lot of areas we can improve and really do much better in organizations. I really love this book, Humanocracy. Only about 4 weeks ago, the second edition came out. Has anybody read this at all? No, it's a fantastic book, and it's really a Bible, if you like, for those who really want to create a different kind of organization. So Gary Hamel and Mikhail Zanini, who talk about bureaucratic drag, and they have this survey called the BMI, or Bureaucratic Mass Index. It takes about 3 minutes. You'll be benchmarked, your organization will be benchmarked against a whole lot of other organizations. So yeah, strongly recommend you do that survey. So we were, Kelly and I were thinking, let's be one of those workshops that actually puts the last slides first. And so the next few slides are kind of the end part of the workshop, if you like. But we just wanted to, get you thinking about these things. And again, this is one of my favorite books from McKinsey. Again, this is the second edition. It came out many, many years ago, but really, for me, is the most robust evidence in terms of the impact of leadership, culture, and organizational performance. And as you can see there, their whole premise is that if we focus too much on performance, or we focus too much on health, then we're not going to really achieve what we want to achieve. So health is the so-called soft stuff, but really is the hard stuff. So organizational culture and capabilities. So what their research showed, and again, very robust, is that change programs that actually do both, so focus on performance and health, will be much more successful. So move from 30% success rate to 79% and deliver nearly double the impact in terms of what it was supposed to achieve. Just show of hands if you've been involved in some kind of change program that really hasn't done much at all, hasn't moved the dial at all in the organization. Just show of hands. Yeah. Oh, the rest of you have. You need to write a book. We know change programs are fraught with lots of risks, right? And there's various percentages thrown out there, but generally about 80% of change fails or doesn't realize the benefits that it's supposed to, which I think sometimes is an overestimate. All right, so as Kelly said, and you've hopefully got this document now, if you fill it out as we go along, that's great. But, this is, as Kelly said, this is a much larger, longer, deeper program. So in 90 minutes, we're really just going to introduce some of the principles and concepts, but we do want you to get value from it. We want you to be able to apply it to a real life project or program, as some of you have put in the chat. So if you feel so inclined, as we pause 5 times throughout the 90 minutes, certainly make some notes, either in a handwritten note or live into the document.
Can I just jump in there, Phil?
Yeah, go.
If you download a version of the Canvas, you'll then be able to fill it in live. So it's a fillable PDF.
Great. So the 5 A's come from the Beyond Performance 2.0 book that I was just referencing. So these are the kind of macro phases of large scale change. And again, there's Cotter and there's various models and frameworks out there. I think this is a little more evidence-based and more contemporary than some of the previous change models that we've been kind of using as our Bible for so many years. So Aspire, which is where do we want to go? Assess, how ready are we to get there? Architect, so what do we need to do to actually create a change plan and move forward? Act is how do we manage the journey? And then finally, advance, how do we keep going and renew and make sure that the change actually sticks? Thoughts about that framework? Sound okay? Fairly intuitive, really, but a little different to many of the change frameworks that we've seen, floating around for decades now. So then the final slide, which I wanted to show you, which again is one of the ending slides, is, well, what are the critical few behaviors which are going to power up those 5 phases that we just went through? And so these are the critical few behaviors that leaders really need to adopt to ramp up change and drive change. Again, these probably won't be a big surprise to you, but firstly, build a culture of psychological safety, which then allows that challenge culture and innovation culture. Build mechanisms of success, and we're going to focus quite heavily on that in the last third of today, is how do we actually create change? Is it top down? Is it bottom up? Is it somewhere in between? Is it a combination of both? And so for us, we're going to, I hope, take quite a different angle than you may have been familiar with previously on how we actually do this. Empower and share leadership. So leadership should be distributed, and leadership, which I've been talking about for 3 decades now, is not a role. It's a verb. Leadership is a doing word. It's not a noun. It always makes me cringe slightly when I hear organizations say, we want you to work with the leaders. And I go, who are they? And they go, oh, everyone from level 3 and above. Okay, so what do level 4 and below do? What do you mean? Well, are they leaders? And so our philosophy is that anyone should be able to lead from anywhere, anytime. And I know some people don't agree with that. Well, if you have leaders, you need followers. Well, we don't really subscribe to that, and we'll be talking much more about that today. All right, so understanding the culture code. So this first part, decoding the systems that actually drive behavior and are the foundation of behavior. So for those who may have come to other webinars or workshops we've ran, the next few slides may look familiar, but we think they're worth just a very quick revisit. The first thing we're really going to talk about and focus on is understanding the difference between complicated and the complex. And this is from Neil Fledgling and other authors as well, as Aaron Dignan. All right, so is the watch on the left-hand side complicated or complex? If it's complicated, put a 1 in the chat. If you think it's complex, a complex system, please put a 2. 1 for complicated, 2 for complex. Two, 1, 2, 2, 1. A nice smattering there. What about the engine? 1 for complicated, 2 for complex. Lots of 2s. Wow. So far, everyone complex. Good, good. All right, let's keep going. We'll come back to that. What about the weather? Is that complicated or complex? 1 for complicated, 2 for complex. Yep, again, a little bit of agreement and a little bit of disagreement there. 2, 1, 2, 2, 2. What about the roundabout? Is it a complicated or complex system? Excellent. This is what we like. We've got about 50-50 on all of these, so that's good. All right. These 2 systems are complicated systems in that they're cause and effect. So if you're a mechanic or a watchmaker or watch fixer, you can move this lever and there's a very predictable kind of chain of events which will happen. So you're very likely to solve the problems through technical knowledge and technical know-how. So complicated systems rarely surprise us, right? So it's a linear process. Versus these two systems, so these are complex systems. They're dispositional, meaning that we can see that there's dark clouds outside and it may rain, but we actually don't know whether it's going to rain or not. So they have a particular attitude or direction that they're taking and they're trending that way, but we actually can't say with any certainty what's going to happen. Similarly in traffic, what's the big variable on the roads that we can't control? Drivers, that's right. Yeah, everyone else. Sounds like organizations, doesn't it? So we actually don't know what's going to happen. There's a few key agents, in a roundabout that may or may not behave in a predictable way. So they're observable, but not easily controllable. So I really like this quote from Niels Fledgling when he says, "To treat complex organizations as complicated systems is a fundamental thinking mistake and an oversimplification." So for those who are familiar with Ronnie Heifetz at Harvard Kennedy School of Government, he talks about adaptive systems, ones that need adaptive systems and then technical systems. And often we apply a technical fix to an adaptive problem. And we wonder why we're revisiting the same project, year after year, or we invest a lot of time and money in a project and don't really get the gains or the benefits we want to see. Dean Williams, also at Harvard, Geelong boy, here in Victoria, calls it counterfeit leadership. So we're looking like we're leading, we're looking like we're creating change, we're actually not moving the dial at all. So this will be one of the key kind of fundamental areas that we look at. So I've talked briefly about systems, and we're going to come back to systems later. We're now going to talk about the people side of it. This is from Dare to Lead, which we are authorised or accredited to run by and for Brené Brown in Dare to Lead. So do you think people are doing the best they can? So again, let's use the chat. 1 is yes, 2 is no. There's no maybe or sometimes. So yes or no. Wow, look at that. All yeses. Who'd like to just briefly come off mute and say why you think people are doing the best they can? We're a small group. We can come off mute. We don't have to just do everything by chat. Who'd like to share?
I can go, Phil. I mean,
Thanks, Grove.
what I've learned from the Dare to Lead is that people are doing the best they can in the given circumstances. That's what I've
Right. Yeah.
remember.
This is probably the first group that ever, and I've asked this question many, many times, where I haven't had a no. So well done. Now, of course, this is not about trying to convince you yes or no, but it's a great question, because if we do answer no, what Brené says about people who answer no is they're probably very hard on themselves and they're probably very hard on other people. And so, yes, based on the circumstances of that individual, if we believe that, we're probably going to manage and lead in a different way versus had we answered no to that. Do people kind of get that? Because if we don't think people are trying to do the best they can, then we're probably going to be quite hard on them and, kind of keep pushing them until they perform or they do better, versus maybe they're in the wrong role. Maybe I need to coach and develop them in a different kind of way so they are their best. So continuing on this this notion of people, this has been around. Douglas McGregor, in his seminal work in the 1960s, talked about theory X and theory Y to help us understand people a little better. You can see on the left-hand side, so theory X, people dislike working, find it boring, people must be motivated by money and external factors, versus Y, where there's more of that intrinsic motivation, and people need need to work because it's purposeful or they find it fulfilling, and the right conditions will create, and get the best from people. It was interesting. Most people think that, most people don't know that what McGregor was actually saying was that here's the brutal truth: Theory X is a myth. There are no Theory X people, according to him, which I tend to agree with. There are no Theory X people. It's a myth. He called it complete prejudice in terms of how we think about people. I don't know whether you find this, but in organizations, there's a whole bunch of managers out there who think their people are Theory X. And they need to be motivated, and they need to be cajoled, and they need KPIs. And, if I wasn't here, boy, they wouldn't be able to do their job. Versus a Theory Y person, or someone who believes about Theory Y, will manage and lead those people very differently. In fact, will probably lead them more than manage them. So again, it's just a way of thinking about that. And if you think about your own teams or the systems you're trying to influence, it'd be interesting to think what's the narrative around people? Is it more Theory X that you hear people talk about, or is it more Theory Y? And how might you be able to influence people around, more towards the Y thinking? So I love this quote. We cannot act on systems, leadership, performance, or change coherently if we don't agree beforehand on the assumptions we hold about human nature and people. Is this resonating for people? Is it making sense? Yep. Great. So I know this is, somewhat theoretical, but unless we can kind of lift the bonnet on this and really go deeper on the very nature of organizations and the very nature of management and leadership, then how the heck are we going to crack the culture code? We can't. We're just going to make the same mistakes, right? So we are going to spend a little bit of time really trying to understand culture and organizations at a different level and potentially a deeper level. This is a really fun one that Kelly's going to take us through now to go deeper on this.
Awesome. Let's move the slide there. Okay, so inside every organization, there's a whole set of assumptions that they're quietly shaping how things get done. Assumptions that, often we don't stop and question. Most of them were passed down to us by maybe leaders who came before. And you can think of these assumptions and the habits and systems that they create as kind of like an operating system. So, just like on your computer, runs silently in the background. Sometimes we hit the tech glitches, but generally keeps everything working, or at least, it appears to. And I think operating systems, they're everywhere once you start looking. Simple example, an intersection, as you're seeing here, where two roads meet. Pretty simple, right? But there's a challenge. How do we let as many cars through as possible without them crashing into each other? And the solution that we've landed on in most places around the world is that signal-controlled intersection, as you're seeing here, the good old traffic light. But I just want to pause for a second. If we look at this as an operating system, and we can start to ask, what are the assumptions behind it? Maybe pop into the chat if you can. What are some of the assumptions, or you can jump off mute. What are some of the assumptions that we can make about traffic lights as an operating system? Feel free to come off mute if it's easier.
The assumption that people will stop.
The assumption that people will
Traffic
stop.
lights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That people will obey. Yeah.
Yeah.
That we understand what each color means.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're assuming people understand the signals and that people will obey them. We're also assuming that people can't be trusted to manage the intersection on their own, that they need to be told what to do, that complex problems have to be managed with elaborate rules and technology, in the form of cables, light switches, control centers, and also that we need a plan for every possible scenario. The multicolored signals, the arrows, the ability to switch from the solid flashing to the flashing lights and so on. Melissa, that they will work and function well. Yeah, absolutely. And so the opposite of that is the roundabout. It's also an operating system, but it's built on completely different assumptions about people and the problem. So what are some of the assumptions that we might make about a roundabout? Pop it into the chat or feel free to jump off mute. People understand the order and the rules. Zoe, yeah, absolutely. People are capable of making good judgments. Yes. People have the capacity to drive safely and are confident in their driving skills. Awesome. People can be trusted, right? And they'll trust each other. Use their judgment, do the right thing. No one's standing there directing the traffic. Drivers in this scenario are expected to make smart choices in real time. And I think it also, it also assumes that complex problems can be managed with just simple rules. So instead of a stack of regulations and sensors, red lights, we've just got a couple of agreements that give way to cars that are already in the circle, go with the flow of the traffic. That's it. And then third, I think, is that assumption that social coordination is enough. So even though hundreds of unpredictable scenarios in this scenario can play out in a roundabout every day, people are going to figure it out together. So it's a really different way of thinking about an operating system. It's grounded in trust, adaptability, and shared responsibility. So curious, pop into the chat, which one do you think is safer? Traffic lights or roundabout? You can just pop a 1 for traffic light, 2 for roundabout. Which one's safer? Yeah, okay.
Mixed bag again.
One mixed bag, yeah. What about which one has higher throughput? A 1 or a 2? Traffic lights or roundabouts? Mix again. Which one is cheaper to build and maintain? Lots of 2s.
Bit more agreement on that one.
Yeah. Which one works better when the power goes out? I think we can all guess that one. So the answer to all 4 is the roundabout. And so, we know that roundabouts reduce injury collisions by about 75% and fatal collisions by 90%. They result in an 89% reduction in delays. They're about $5,000 to $10,000 cheaper to maintain every year. And they work in power outages. But which one are we more comfortable with? Which one do we see more? The signal controlled intersection or the traffic lights? So I think sometimes we can confuse, popularity or what we've done before with quality and what maybe works better. So these 2 approaches I think are a really good metaphor for what's happening in organizations. The way that we're working and the way that we know best isn't serving us anymore, but it's really hard to trust the alternative. And our organizational operating system, the practices, the policies, the processes, procedures, all of those norms that shape our day-to-day, it's so prevalent that we almost take it for granted. But I think if we stop to, or if you've ever stopped to wonder why we need managers or budgets or performance reviews, that's that process of questioning the operating system or the legacy operating system. That's us questioning that without even knowing it. So at this point, I'd love you to pull out the culture canvas and just take a moment to consider the Aspire section. When it comes to your organization's culture, where do you want to go? Where do we want to go? What kind of culture do you want to be known for? What kind of stories do we want people to tell? Which attributes are going to enable our strategy? Just take a moment to reflect on that section, and if you'd like to, if you'd like to share maybe something that's come up for you throughout the session so far that you can take a note of, feel free to jump off mute or pop in the chat if you'd like.
Well, I guess, Cal, it could be project specific as well, like some of the things I'm just looking, some of the things people have put in the chat. Project or program specific. Transformation programs, quality practice, etc.
Is there anyone who'd like to share?
Well, I'd put in terms of a group, have autonomy, open, trusting, high performing, and be considerate.
Nice.
I've recently learned about it. And according to me, I mean, what I've learned is there are four components which I've learned: stretch, self-discipline, trust, and support. So stretch means when people wants to do more in the team, more than you ask them to do. And self-discipline, without telling them they are attending 9 a.m. meeting, going to what they need to do, uh, you know, and all that stuff by themselves, having a self-discipline, and trust and support, that actually makes a real culture, I think, according to me.
Love it. Thanks for sharing, Gaurav.
In terms of stories you want people to tell, we have each other's back.
Nice. Love that, Gary. Thanks. I'm sure we could spend quite a bit of time on this section, but I'm going to pass back to Phil because we've got so many slides to go through.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I was just how are people feeling about the roundabout traffic control signal metaphor? It's I think it's a really handy one. It's from Brave New Work. So Aaron Dignan, again, one of my top 10 favorite business books of all time. It's just a brilliant book. And I challenge teams and organizations a lot to say, how many traffic control signals do you have in your organization when you could have a roundabout? One person mucks up, right? And so we install a traffic control signal and that policy, 10 years later, people forget why we have that policy and eventually we have this bureaucratic drag that just slows organizations down to the point of, almost stopping sometimes. And it's, any wonder we can't be agile and shift to changing circumstances or context. And it really does feel like the Titanic shifting larger organizations particularly. And so bureaucracy is not inherently bad, but when we've got so much of it, it can really drag us down. So I just love just for a minute, and we'll continue because I just love to get some people's perceptions on how this is kind of landing for you as a useful construct.
I think it's a super useful construct because what it brought up for me is if we're talking to leaders around the concept of the roundabout, what might be going on for them that would mean they would shy away from that. So what are they needing to lean into more or let go of that might be challenging for them?
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. What do they have to let go of? It's our understanding of how a manager adds value. And we see traditionally, controlling, checking, decision-making is the value that managers add. Most people don't need someone to do those things for them if we give them the right tools and the right context. My personal view, the manager should be about coaching and empowering the team and then getting the hell out of the way. Whereas the opposite of what happens in most organizations. We need to stay safe from a governance perspective and risk perspective, but what's the minimal viable policy we need to stay safe and compliant, but then free up the system? And that's where we're going to head now, is to, well, how do you do that? Any other thoughts before we keep going? No? Excellent. I'm going to ask you a question, Madam Jess, because you haven't stopped smiling, which is always very nice. All right, maybe the next question. So again, this is just extending some of the work from Brave New Work, and I guess this is a strong signal as to where we're heading. So this notion of invalid operating systems, which Kelly mentioned, I really love what Edwards Deming said, as the renowned statistician, and helped organisations in the many years ago to become more efficient. But he said a bad system will always beat a good person, and so we can develop our people as much as we want, but the system is, if it's not aligned to what we're trying to achieve, this bad system will always win. So he used that phrase to really, illustrate a whole bunch of things around most performance problems are caused by the system, not people. And he said 94% of problems in organizations come from the system. So the processes, structure, culture, and leadership, rather than from the individuals themselves, which is a bit damning. If that statistic is true, then we should be working more systemically and not just blaming individuals. You need to change, you need to do better. How do we fix the system to support them? So there's cost of bureaucracy, as we've already started to talk about. If we really want to crack the culture code, then we need to understand the difference between old style legacy organizations and ones that are maybe more evolutionary. And again, this is the terminology from Brave New Work. So how do we move into a different kind of organization where people are more self-directed? We provide more trust, we provide more relevant development, which actually really helps them be amazing. And so there's two fundamental pillars that Brave New Work talk about. One is we put people first. So we're people positive and we're complexity conscious. So I really love these. People positive is about being adaptive, trust and respect, as I mentioned. Dan Pink talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose, which is also listed here. But then understanding the difference between complicated and complex, and know that in many cases we treat complex problems as if they're complicated, and is it any wonder we don't really achieve what we're trying to achieve? I love this quote, just to finish off there, Aaron Dignan piece. We cannot do the best work of our lives under the auspices of an operating system that presumes our stupidity, our laziness, and our untrustworthiness. When it comes to people, in many ways, you get what you're designed for. So to be people positive is to assume and expect the best of everyone. I really love that. Just a thumbs up if that resonates with you as a quote. Yep. Awesome. I read this out. The very first time I used this, I was working with a large Australian hospital, and the director of nursing said, she swore out really loudly and said, "That is our world. That is our reality. That's exactly what we do to our people, tens of thousands of people. That's how we treat them." And she got very energized by this quote. So just quickly going backwards before we go forward. So the rise and fall of a brilliant idea. So most of us know about Frederick Taylor, his 1911 book on the principles of scientific management. Did amazing things in those times, but this kind of notion of separating the thinkers, who we bestow the title of manager, from the doers, is long past its use by date. And so super important in the industrial age and efficiencies in factories and what have you, but it doesn't work nearly as well now. And the command and control style has kind of run its course. Just to indicate how we're still stuck in the past a little bit, here's an org chart. What year do you think this org chart is from? What year? Just pop it in the chat. Looks like a typical org chart, doesn't it? 2024. Thanks, Jess. Now, if you're trying to read the fine print on the org chart, you probably won't find a date, so just pop a date in the chat instead. 2010. Thanks, Gary. 2025. Excellent. 1950. Go, Andrew. It's even earlier than that. Most people have no idea. And the dates kind of range from 1800 right through to present day. So it's actually about 125 years old. It's from a company called the Pacific and Southern Railway System or Railway Organisation. So if you saw something out of that era, you'd be able to carbon date it immediately. But we can't carbon date an org chart because we still structure organisations in the same way. Can any of you see any of yourselves in these pictures? So we can kind of carbon date the car, the camera, the dress, the boombox. We can tell roughly what era those things are from. Org chart, not so much. Haven't really changed that much at all. So every organisation has three structures. And if we don't understand these structures, then we're going to be much less effective in terms of creating or cracking the culture code and creating meaningful change. And we ignore them at our peril. So across all organizations from startups to global enterprise, there's the informal structure. And that's where power and influence happens. Then there's a value creation structure. And the more value we create, the more our reputation goes up. And then there's the formal structure. And so I guess the key to this diagram is that it's not one or the other. It's actually, we probably need some structure. But, you know, if we were just to be just a network of individuals of just people kind of clustering together, we probably need some organizing principles. And so how do we consciously think about the structures that are going to be most useful and how we dial them up and dial them down without being overly bureaucratic, overly informal, or overly having no structure at all. So I like the interplay of these. So the traditional one, which Niels Fledgling calls alpha organizations, which are those, you know, based on the industrial age paradigm, which most organizations are based on today. So control through bosses, problems when information flows up, and then instructions and commands and policy, what have you, comes down. Versus a design principle beta, which is more about increased levels of transparency, trust, relationships and connections are critical, as is group pressure. I don't really like this term, but how do we actually hold each other accountable? So peer accountability is much more important than top-down accountability. I had a person recently from a large university. They're going through an 18-month program we're running. And he's a senior leader, and he protested loudly. He said, "I hold my people accountable." I said, "That sounds like a failure of leadership." I was trying to be provocative. And he goes, "Why is that?" I said, "Well, why do you have to hold them accountable? Why can't we create a sense of ownership, give them the right training, the right tools, the right clarity?" But again, it's this kind of parental notion of manager knows best, and I have to hold my people accountable. I don't know. How do we change the philosophy? How do we change the narrative that we teach people how to be accountable and have ownership without having someone having to do it to them? Does that make sense? Yep. Excellent. So the traditional bureaucratic hierarchy in organizations where managers control a pyramid of followers is mostly ineffective. We need a new idea of organizations that are connected networks. And the truth is that most our organizations are already networks. Like who thinks that the chain of information, what have you, follows the org chart? No, people skip about and they go to people they know and shortcuts. And, if it wasn't for people's ingenuity, organizations would be slower and even less efficient. And so this perspective, the fact that our organizations already operate like this, but we try and constrain them through policy and structure and process and what have you, rather than actually liberate them a little, let them flow more freely. Also, really like this idea that we should empower teams, not individuals. So how do we empower teams to hold each other accountable to do the work they need to do, rather than empower one individual who then has to try and empower a whole set of others. So it's a really great principle, I think, to remember. If we're going to empower anyone or anything, empower teams, because they're the unit of productivity rather than individuals. So culture is not a success factor. Again, you know, we're working with a different large Australian organisation, healthcare organisation, and suffice to say, there's been some bad patient outcomes because of lack of collaboration, lack of leadership, very rigid processes, systems, people not working well together in the surgical suite, for example, in the operating suite. You can't shift culture. You can only shift the things that will shift culture. So culture is a shadow of the things you already have. So organizations are perfectly aligned to get the results they get. So we can't work directly on culture. That's observable, but we have to work on the mechanisms which create the culture. Just to have a little bit of fun with this, Kelly's going to take us through a couple of live examples in terms of how organizations really work, yet we choose not to necessarily see it this way.
Thanks, Phil. So what are we looking at here? Look familiar? I know I have some of these in my own backyard. These are known as desire paths, and they usually follow the most direct route. This desire path, I believe, was spotted in Dunsborough, a coastal town in Western Australia. And this one from, I believe, Halls Gap in Victoria. So they can be spotted in both cities and natural environments.
I think this one's Halls
Oh,
Gap.
this one's Halls Gap, yes.
Yeah, the previous one was
mistake.
WA. Yeah.
Previous one was WA. This one is a Melbourne suburb of Abbotsford, created by train commuters. And in some places, authorities have even put signs up to deter people from creating these desire paths. And sometimes, you know, those in authority try to stop or dissuade this errant behaviour. Sometimes might be seen as or interpreted as rules or procedures and bureaucracy. So what can we learn from these desire lines, or what can we take from these desire lines? You can pop in the chat or you know, jump off mute. What are some of the things that you could take away from these desire lines? How can we relate it back to our organisation? Path of least resistance. Absolutely. Thanks, Jess. Anyone else want to jump in?
Showed this to a board a while ago, and one of the board members said, "Everybody's lazy." That was his interpretation. People are lazy. I said, "Oh, that's one interpretation."
Jess, a reflection of what's needed rather than what was planned. Melissa, shortcuts. Nice. Andrew, breaking rules can be more efficient.
Nice one.
I love it. Reflection of more comfortable ways. Yeah. So, like I think it was Jess said, people usually take the path of least resistance. And formal pathways are a loose representation of reality. Informal pathways can be channels of hyper efficiency. That defensive architecture is created to combat new norms of behaviour, more rules. Informal pathways can become the norm. And then information pathways are the unspoken rules and implicit assumptions that drive behaviour. I love this. This is a great example of a desire path, comes from the Ohio State University. And the story goes that back in 1914, the university architect waited really patiently for winter before using a hot air balloon to get a bird's eye view of the intricate web of crisscrossing trails that students had carved in the snow. And so their findings were then used in the configuration of the formal network of paved walkways. Pretty clever, I think. So it's user-centered design in action. So I guess the question then is, what if we work to understand how our team or our organization really works rather than force it? How do we design for it? Love to hear your thoughts. Anyone want to jump off mute? And see we're thinking. I'd love to hear, how this is landing. If it's resonating with you.
It's good.
It's kind of the opposite of bureaucracy, isn't it? We're finding out how people work and then supporting that by building the pathways versus have a bureaucratic process that forces pathways of people either don't want to follow or choose not to follow. And we wonder why there's so many rule breakers, quote unquote, in organizations.
I love that, Jess, through observation, consultation, and conversation. How we try to understand how our team and organization really work. Creating psychological safety, Gaurav, absolutely. Understanding what drives people. Awesome. So then if we bring this back to the canvas and we link back in and we look at the assess column, where are we now? What's working really well? What's already in place? Where are those desire lines showing up? Also looking at what's holding us back. What's stopping us from using those desire lines? And where do we see any tension or inconsistency? So again, just taking a moment, you can pop into the document or even jump off mute if you wanted to share any thoughts or insight.
This is where we'd harvest any existing data as well, isn't it, Kelly? Like pulse surveys or engagement surveys or whatever else, and just try and get a really honest assessment as to where the project is or the organization or the team.
Gaurav, I saw you come off mute just before. Did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to share a reflection of this as well. That sometimes, agreement and disagreement. So people tend to agree as a group, but they don't agree as soon as they leave the meeting and they try to do what they need to do, right? The culture where people maybe they have differences in the thought, but once we all agree to something, we all stick towards it. So I think that is something will also bring, that culture change.
Nice. Element of groupthink, yeah.
Kelly, I was reflecting on just the university pathways there too, and going back to where Phil started with the complicated and complex, and those the roundabouts where the humans are involved. They're the great variable, and that it turns it into more of a. It may not appear like a complex system, but to predict how humans are going to behave across that that lawned area was actually far more. There's not a predictable cause and effect pattern, and that observation and patience was required to understand. It was probably more complex. So trying to approach a lot of those designs through more of a complicated framework than a complex framework, I was wondering.
I'll let you jump in there, Phil.
Was the last part of the question? So you're wondering whether the pathway creation was more complex or complicated?
That maybe the folly of some of the designs you showed earlier were where it was assumed it was, even though it seemed relatively simple, the design,
right? Yes,
they weren't necessarily factoring the complexity of human beings, and so the design principles, or one of it was a complicated design feature, certainly not a complex one.
Yeah. Yep.
The university took time to appreciate that
And they understood how
there was-
people really think, right? Or they understood that we need to understand how they're thinking, or they're going to use, as Kelly said, the user design principles. So let's really, it's the old, almost like the old time and motion studies, right? Let's watch what people do and how they interact with something before we actually solidify the design. So yeah, 100%, Gary. Yeah. User-centered design. That's the word I was looking for. Excellent. Shall I take it from here, Kelly? Is
Go
it me
for it.
next?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we need to be aware of the signals as well that the system is sending, i.e. get in a hot air balloon and look at the pathways. I know some of you won't think I'm old enough to be a grandfather. I know that. But I am. This is my oldest granddaughter is now 3, so Evie. An example of behaviors or norms that are largely hidden until someone or something points them out. I discovered once she was a toddler, she used to get down on the ground or get up off the ground and groan. She'd go, "Oh." Where do you reckon she learnt that from? Me. And I said, "What? Why are you groaning?" She goes, "Oh, you do." Right. So
dad
Billy
noises,
Connolly,
I think they're known as.
what's that?
I think they're known as dad noises.
Dad noises. Yeah, Billy Connolly calls them old people noises. Yeah.
Ah.
So how do we? I guess that it's funny, but for me it was hilarious in terms of actually how systems hold a mirror up sometimes, and if we tune into those signals, we can actually see what's really or hear what's really happening, like the desire lines, right? If we're really tuned in, we can work with the system and not against it. And sometimes it takes a toddler to point out what you actually do, which is hilarious, I think. All right. What is different about those two contexts? People were clearly behaving very differently. Why? Why is it at a football match? It might be okay to act like a Yahoo, call people names, maybe be racist, maybe be rude. In a church, we see what, this individual did. She walked in very quietly and solemnly and respectfully. What is it about? There's no signs at the front of the stadium that says, hey, you can act like a Yahoo here. Or in the church, hey, act quietly and solemnly, don't speak up. How do we learn those contexts?
Jess has popped in the chat. The environment's a signal. There are social events for each.
Absolutely.
Socialization.
Socialization, learn behaviors. Yep. What about in lifts? What are the rules and assumptions about lift riding?
Don't say anything.
Don't say anything. That's right. So generally we don't speak up, or if we do speak, we speak quietly. Yeah. What other rules are there?
Face the front, the doors.
Face the front. Yep. I don't know whether you've seen that candid camera. I meant to put it in here actually. The candid camera video in the 50s.
Yeah.
Where the stooge, the victim, all the staff face the back of the lift, and he slowly turns around and faces the back as well, right? Because that's what everyone else is doing. It's hilarious. Where do you, if you're the only one in the lift, where do you stand? We each have a different, like I go to the back corner. Yep. Some people might want to be the controller there at the buttons, right? I got control. You can't get hold of these buttons. What happens if a second person comes in? Would it be weird if they went and sat or stood right beside you in the corner? Of course it would. We spread out. Yep. A third person comes in, the human shuffle happens because, again, there's no sign that says they shall not stand next to someone else in the lift if there's only 2 of you. Thou shall not speak up loudly. So these are the assumptions and what have you, the signals, that the learned behavior that we get from systems and organizations. So if we're to extrapolate this a little, actually, before I do that, I love this quote from Irving Borick, who was a Harvard professor, and his wife. I worked with them, brought them over to Australia many years ago with one of my teams, and brilliant systems thinker. He's passed away now, but he says systems like gravity, they exert a very powerful pull on behavior, but we can't always see them. So that's that whole notion of culture. And just to finish this little section off, I really love the work of Priya Parker, How We Gather Matters.
Mm.
Was that Gary?
Yeah.
Yeah, you've read that one as well?
Yeah, really enjoy her work.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So she talks about rooms and furniture have scripts, and where without knowing it, we kind of follow those scripts. A boardroom has certain scripts of power dynamics, the way we speak to each other, how we dress, etc., versus something which is much more informal. And so where we're starting to head with this conversation is actually we know how hard it is to change ourselves. So imagine how hard it is to change other people. Maybe the secret sauce is we change the context, we change the mechanisms in which people interact, and we can get behavior change immediately. From the footy oval or the arena to the church to the lift. Our understanding of role and how we take up that role in that moment dictates how we behave in that moment. So we don't actually need to spend years and years and years and years trying to change people's mindset and behavior, although that is important. I've made a living off doing that. But there's an and here. How do we change the context, the meeting structure, the mechanisms, the norms that actually will create a change in behavior? So that's where we're heading in this kind of last section. So this is the architect piece. Yes, mindsets and behaviors are important. So what must shift? Importantly, though, what are the systems or the rituals or the mechanisms or the context that we can shift in our organization, in our team, to start to get the behavior change we want? So maybe just jot down a couple of ideas. I was working with a team last week, Monday, Tuesday, last week. Seriously dysfunctional. One of the most effective things they said they were going to do, they realized that their teams were in separate corners, the respective kind of leadership team components, and they were missing that incidental contact. Really basic thing, right? So let's all come together in the one area. That's a really simple mechanism, a really simple contextual change, which will absolutely change how they relate to each other. One of many things they'll need to do, but could be who chairs meetings. Like it's just, there's so many small things we can do that will move the dial. How do we share power, share decision making, change people's understanding of role? Maybe one other quick example before I hear from a couple of people. We worked with 200 partners in a professional service firm over about a 6-year period. The managing partner wanted to really change the behavior of partners, one that was seriously commercially based and, to be honest and blunt, quite self-serving, to one that was going to set up the next generation of leaders, so the firm would be a global law practice for another 100 years. And so rather than trying to change their mind, all we did was change our understanding of what their role was as a partner, and just started to change that context and their understanding of the role, and the behavior shifted quite rapidly. You know, they stopped benching people. They started developing people. They started having hard conversations. They started thinking more longer term. So any examples that people would like to, any simple ones, things you might be already doing or you've seen happen to change the context that has created change? As I said, could be meeting structure, anything.
I think try and give greater ownership on have specific events or things to change things up.
Yep, absolutely, Andrew.
Change the chair in my case. You know, people change around facilitating meetings.
So that's that sharing of power, isn't it? Because
Yeah,
the facilitator does have authority
yeah,
vested in them by the role. But
yeah.
how do we share that? Yeah. Jess, you've got back corner. What did you mean on that one? Or Jessica, rather?
That's
Is that-
okay. It's from the elevator question earlier.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah.
Got you. You stand in the back corner with me, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. I hope you're in the other corner, though, because that would be weird. Very good. All right.
One of the things, Phil, one of the famous bank they have done, which changed the culture, was they implemented a term called Mojo. Mojo is meeting organizer and joyful observer. So
Meeting
basically, they
organizer
were
and joyful officer, was it?
observer.
Mojo. Like
Because
it.
because there were a lot of meetings happening in the bank, and a lot of meetings are just waste of time. There was nothing is coming out of the meetings. So to be more
Right.
productive, they created that term, and then they actually went very efficient in how to conduct meeting and save a lot of time.
Excellent. That's a great example. Okay, before we move on to the critical behaviours, just to finish that section off, these are when we're working with teams and organisations, we invite them to think about these three levels, which is similar to what we've been talking about. What are the triggers? What are the mechanisms? What's the systems that we need to understand and tweak? Knowing that most organisations are very comfortable on the left-hand side, the technical, mostly comfortable, but not always in the personal, which is that long list, but mostly very unfamiliar about the systems piece. In fact, it was at a tech session, Andrew, some years ago, where I talked about, we over personalize things in organizations. And I said, have you ever had two roles that there's like an organizational fault line there, like marketing and sales, for example? And one of the guys at the back of the room swore loudly, and he goes, oh. And I said, what was that about? And I thought he's going to, challenge me and tell me what I was talking was rubbish. But he said, we did everything in our power to get the marketing and sales directors to work together, and we couldn't. So we actually got rid of both of them. It was that bad. We've hired 2 new marketing and sales directors, and they're fighting again. I said, case in point, you need to get the role relationship right. It's not actually about the people. And so that's a really good example of how we need to think systemically first and then personally second, not just blame the individuals in the role. How have we set the roles up for success? And in many cases, it's actually a role mismatch, and people are taking up the role as they see fit, which may or may not be right. All right. I know we're running out of time a little bit here. So the few critical behaviours. So these back to that triangle. We have a development stream, as I mentioned at the start, called organisational excellence, or at least the development stream. And Tom Peters talks about excellence, which we really love. What does excellence look like? It's not a 3-year project. It's what I do in the next minute, how I interact with people. And it's also very aligned with the people first culture. I don't know if anyone's read this book, but it's his 24th and final book. He says he's hanging up his bat. He's going home. He's frustrated and annoyed and angry that 40 years later, after first publishing In Search of Excellence in 1982, I think it was, that organisations really haven't shifted much in his view. And he said throughout his whole career, people have said, Tom, why do you focus so much on the people side of it? And he goes, what else is there? What else is there, in organizations? And so, we really resonate very strongly with that view. So these are the critical behaviors we talked about, which will really drive a lot of the things we've been talking about, having that kind of systems view, and then being able to build the culture, psychological culture, which will create people to be able to have the conversations and challenge and iterate and talk about the desire lines, you know, and how do we find hyper efficient ways to work? And we can only do that if we feel safe to speak up. And we'll only do that if our leader, the person with the vested authority, shares power, shares authority, shares leadership. As Andrew said, you know, rotating the chair is a simple example. Okay, so we're up to the act. I might just skip over that because we do have one more stage to do, given our time. So this is the how do we build the mechanisms piece, the actual how do we create the arena versus the church. And these are some of the principles, and you'll have the recording, so you'll be able to look back on all of these. But for us, organizational excellence is not a one-off, it's an evolution. How do we create safe to fail experiments? How do we iterate? How do we create those desire lines? How do we really understand how the organization works? There's a couple of principles here. So these are really what would guide us to create a more evolutionary organization. It's things like excellence, accountability and ownership, giving people choice within boundaries, of course, not that they're going to break the law or something, but giving people much more latitude and choice than they have now, rather than being constrained by formal structures. Again, you'll have this. This is from the Performance and Health. Remember the very first slide I put up, Beyond Performance 2.0, the McKinsey framework. So this is the 5 frames that we talked about right at the start, the 5 A's. This is the very detailed version from their book, which I highly recommend. Again, it's one of my top 10 favorite books of all time. So highly recommend diving into it. If you need to convince anyone in your organization about the value of leadership, culture, team health and organizational health, it's laced with really robust evidence to support the return on investment of those things. So they're the kind of frames that we look at. And we've simplified that just by putting it into this model. So the 5 A's are there. But what I did want to show you...
Phil, I think Jess has got a question.
Go Jess.
I don't know if I can, it might be my audio.
You're a bit quiet.
Yeah, your audio's gone funny.
I'll chat it.
Okay, I'll keep going while you chat. And so that's the 5 A's, the 5 A's is the overall framework for macro change. But how do we change things daily? How do we actually have a spinning effect? And I'm doing a spinning effect because I want to introduce you to the TLS cultural flywheel. And this flywheel is about what are the mechanisms, the structures or rituals that are going to reinforce the behavior that we really want. What are the outcomes? So what happens as a result? How do we recognize that and give positive cues to the signals that we receive, or negative signals if it's not what we want? And then finally, feedback. So the system will will give us feedback on what's working or not working. And so this flywheel effect then really becomes like the engine room, if you like. So a really simple example: goal, build trust and collaboration. How the heck do we do that? 2 of the biggest things that teams need to do, over time. How about we embed a very simple system like a daily check-in in our meetings? We're just going to check in. How are we traveling? What's working, what's not working. Teams practice that. They learn to challenge with curiosity. We measure the changes. Then the leader recognizes that in a positive sense, or the team members do. And suddenly we've created more collaboration and more trust through a simple mechanism, as in a check-in, rather than trying to say, hey, you need to be more trustworthy. And so that's really what we're saying here is how do you create multiple flywheels every day? How do you create dozens of mechanisms which are going to support the change that you're trying to create? So there's the structures and rituals that we each create. I know I'm racing forward here a little bit, but I guess the canvas again from Brave New Work, so the same book I've referenced lots of times, talks about that operating system that we spoke about right at the start. And this is really gives us indicators as to what are the areas where we might find those rituals. like authority, as we've said a few times, how do we make decisions? How do we share power? How do we change our meeting structure? So that's the purpose of this. And again, highly recommend that as a read. Really simple example, authority. These are some of the questions we can ask ourselves about how authority is distributed. Really simple structure is, how do we make decisions? If it's a below the waterline decision, meaning if we make it and there's a hole in the boat, that would sink the organisation or damage our reputation, versus an above the waterline decision where you can go and do it yourself. And so we can have these conversations about what are the structures and the mechanisms to create more meaningful change and more meaningful decision making. These are some of the simple tools we have. So a check-in might be rose, thorn, bud. What's working well? What's not working so well? What's emergent for us? Or having a decision tree, again, part of our organisational excellence toolkit. What decisions can we make? What are leaf decisions, branch, trunk, root decisions? Is another mechanism which then starts to fast track how we make decisions together. And again, I like this from Brave New Work. What's the tension? So we might say we run really bad meetings, or we dread turning up to our team meeting. So what's the tension? Let's try something for 2 weeks. Just experiment. Install a mechanism. It could be a check-in or rotating chair, or I'm just trying to use common examples like meetings, or the team canvas. So that's kind of the macro view. We have the 5 frames. We understand systems more effectively. We know it's much more than just mindsets and behaviours. And how do we install these and use it in a much more agile way to trust people, treat them like roundabouts, not put traffic control signals in at every turn to try and control behaviour. So these are the areas we've covered. Culture code, what is it? How do we operationalise it? What are the behaviours we need to really create meaningful change? So in the 2 minutes we have remaining, I might hand back over to Kelly, and I really hope that's been of value and giving you some different angles to think about, because we see that organisations make the same mistakes time and time and time again for years and years and years, the same mistakes. It's time to do something different.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil. I'm sure everyone's taken something away from the session today. Would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Maybe one thing that you're going to take from the session today and implement within your organisation would be fantastic to hear. And just while you're doing that, just as I mentioned before, Amplify is the program that we were speaking about earlier on in the session, and it's really designed to help a select group of senior leaders from different organisations to step out of the weeds and into that strategic influence space so that they can lead transformations, elevate their team, build their executive brand, and unlock that next level with confidence. So as I mentioned, I'll just pop into the chat again the link if you did want to make a time to chat with Phil and I about either the culture code and that culture code canvas that you've now got, or if you wanted to talk about whether you might be the right fit for the Amplify program. We would love to have a conversation. Loving seeing these comments come through. Love the traffic lights and roundabouts analogy. Fantastic. Thanks, Jess. Zoe, a good reminder of needing to think about the systems within the organisation that are influencing behaviours. Absolutely. Discussion around systemic before the personal. Thanks, Jessica.
Look for roundabouts. Love it, Melissa.
Nice. Enjoyed the systemic focus and how to chunk this down. Thanks, Gary. Great to hear. I know we're like right on 5 o'clock. You did so well, Phil, keeping to time. Look at that.
Rushed that last bit. Obviously, we haven't delivered that before. So as most of everyone in the room would understand, once you design something, it's a little bit of trial and error, right? So we're a little bit iterative. But next time we'll be maybe give 5 more minutes for Q&A. But if there's any burning questions, happy to stay on for a couple of minutes.
Otherwise, thanks everyone for giving up your afternoon on a Thursday. Really appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. That was great. Really good.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, Rav.
Thanks, Phil and
Gary.
Kelly.
Thanks, Jess.
Cheers.
Thank you, Zoe. See you, Melissa.